morning, ladies and gentlemen. I don't mind saying that I'm slightly in awe of this incredible stage and distinguished audience. And before I talk about the business of podcasting, at the Bauer Media Group, our business is primarily magazine media and audio, so it's a neat intersection. But before we start to talk about that, I actually just wanted to echo a couple of things that had been said in the keynote and by the Chancellor this morning, which is that I think podcasts are a great celebration of passion and of views, and are an incredibly open platform for people to publish on. And I think that is absolutely something that we should cherish and nurture as much as possible. And secondly, that I do think, and hopefully one of the things that you will see in this talk, is that quality is increasingly being demanded. And I think all of us in this room are in the business of producing quality content, and hopefully that presents a great opportunity for us. It's been 15 years since the term podcast was coined by The Guardian's Ben Hammersley. Sorry, I'm just having a slight issue with the... We've got another clicker. Sorry, it does not seem to be working, unfortunately. I'll carry on with the talk, but if someone could come and just give me a hand, that would be great. It's been 15 years since the term podcast was coined by The Guardian's Ben Hammersley. And in that time, podcasting has grown from really quite a niche audio blogging tool to an information and entertainment media in its own right. It's not a surprise that the mass penetration of the smartphone and its usage as a multimedia device has accelerated the delivery and the consumption of podcasts. There is no question now that more podcasts are being consumed than ever before. And yet, our industry, our CEOs, our investors are all asking the same question, which is this really a viable business, and can it make money? I believe that we have reached a tipping point. Last year, in the UK, podcast advertising revenue surpassed the number of listeners for the first time. In the next 3 years, UK advertising revenues from podcasts are forecast to triple to over £30 million, with listeners growing to half of the adult population. In the USA, advertising revenue will grow from $169 million in 2016 to a predicted $659 million in 2020. Podcasting is growing its own business ecosystem with a multitude of aggregators, of monetizers, and of bespoke content studios emerging. This is not a mature media market. I want to make that clear. There are many companies and creators experimenting in this space, whether professional or independent, whether taking the approach of building a network or taking advantage of one, and whether focusing on sales or distribution. But as publishers, we cannot be better positioned to take advantage. Podcasting is a natural fit with the skill set that content creators in news and magazine media possess. Specialized knowledge, delivered with opinion and personality, and a capability and understanding of storytelling. At Bauer Media Group, with our unique blend of audio and magazine media, we have already invested in this space and will continue to do so. I would like to take this moment in front of this audience of distinguished media executives to highlight what I see as the opportunities and challenges that exist with this media in 5 key areas. In the area of audience, data, commercialization, discovery, and content development. I'm assuming we're not going to get my presentation, so I will kind of carry on regardless. Podcast listeners are a unique and highly attractive audience to advertisers. We will move on. They are younger than radio listeners and much more likely to consume podcasts than traditional radio. They are immersed in the media, with over half of all podcast listeners in the UK consuming more than 5 different podcasts a week, listening to all or most of each episode. Possibly surprisingly, almost 50% of all podcast listening is done at home, and about 30% on a journey, but almost all of it is done one-on-one rather than as a communal experience, which is what makes it so attractive. Acast, which is a Swedish aggregator of podcasts, describes them to advertisers as the unreachables because of their soulless consumption of podcasts over other media and the rejection of other advertising formats. It's essential that the characteristics that keep this audience engaged, creative, original, thought-provoking, witty content, are retained as the media evolves. So to advertisers, both the audience and the environment, an intimate audio experience is highly attractive. But what are they buying? There's a startling lack of data in podcasts. In a broadcast medium, it's accepted, if not liked, by the media buying community. In a native digital medium, this is an anomaly. The distribution has always been readily available and encouraged by the likes of Apple, Google, and SoundCloud, amongst others, with Spotify fast becoming a major player in this market. As in other forms of digital media, however, user data has been tightly guarded by these gatekeepers. For now, advertisers have been happy to accept survey-based information to provide an insight into who the listener is, and they will trade on that. But I do not see this as a sustainable long-term solution. Data is a double-edged sword for media owners, as we know. With greater transparency comes a greater demand to segment and to atomize advertising to these audiences, often through exchanges. But I believe that unless media owners grasp hold of this inevitable fact, the outcome cannot be managed in a way that suits us. This demands that as podcast creators, we support platforms that offer greater insight and lobby those that don't. Despite all of this, advertising revenues continue to grow. Within the current distribution framework, podcasts offer media owners a mix of low and high value commercial revenue opportunities. The market in the UK is still largely driven by direct response advertising, accounting for 90% of all podcast advertising. The trend, however, is for increasing number of advertisers using the medium for brand awareness activity, with, in the US, 34% of podcast revenues attributed to this. We still see that the most requested and saleable commercial opportunity is integrated sponsorships. Live reads by the podcast host, specifically written in the style of the podcast, have proven to deliver the best responses and as such have commanded significant premiums. In the UK, demand for these has meant that in some instances we are integrating secondary sponsorships into the middle of some of our longer podcasts. Alongside this, as a major European radio business, we're able to leverage broader digital audio deals to deliver spot media placements as pre, mid, and post rolls. CPMs for these are much lower, but for us, it acts as a valuable way to supplement our income. And for non-radio businesses, these spot sales can be implemented through a number of off-the-shelf exchanges. And finally, in the UK and in the US, we're starting to see an increase in demand for bespoke branded content solutions. In the US last year, this revenue stream increased 330% year on year as advertisers sought to increase and integrate their messaging further. At Bauer Media UK, we have a major new podcast being delivered and developed for an automotive manufacturer, and another for a large parenting business. And elsewhere, there are many specialist podcast production studios that are producing for large corporates in financial services and other industries. So the great news for media owners is that podcasts have great consumer and advertiser demand, but discovery remains the biggest challenge for creators. As has happened in digital media in general, the barriers to entry have fallen away, but the proliferation of new podcasts has made it harder for new podcasts to be noticed. At the moment, our podcast producers rely heavily on word of mouth and a strong social media footprint, but our experience is that a broad and varied marketing and media mix is required to allow podcasts to reach critical mass. We see three strong pillars of an effective marketing campaign. Firstly, a mutually beneficial influencer network. Existing podcast consumers are much more inclined to try new related podcasts. And it's an interesting fact for those of us that are in the business, which is that podcast producers, even amongst so-called competitors, are incredibly socially supportive. And we've found that cross-promotion with some of these like-minded podcasts can be a rapid and effective means to attract new listeners. Secondly, effective use of social media. One of the inherent challenges with podcasts is the lack of shareability. It's not content that can be readily shared by the user. How do you allow your loyal listeners to share something that they have found interesting or inspiring within an hour-long podcast? We have begun to assist the listener in this by extracting clips and pushing these out in visually interesting formats, with Instagram and Twitter being particularly effective, and also experimenting and using Reddit as an effective way to reach niche audiences. And finally, digital radio marketing. Whilst obviously as a radio business we benefit from an in-house infrastructure, digital radio spots for targeted audiences can be bought at very cost-effective rates, and the parallels between digital radio listening and podcasts are strong. I'd like to finish by highlighting three trends in content that are emerging in the podcast space that hopefully all of us in this room can benefit from. Firstly, there is a definite pivot from entertainment into information. The entire podcast business really developed out of largely entertainment genres, especially comedy and interviews. And now we increasingly see that people are looking to augment these lean-back entertainment podcasts with more lean-in formats, deep dives into specific areas of passion, interest, and insight. And in a crowded market, shows that go deeper with specific audiences are likely to stand out more. Also, building a network of related podcasts. As my predecessor in this on stage here has done with The Economist, building a network of related podcasts within tightly defined genres has a multiplying marketing effect. Secondly, native audio storytelling. This might be bespoke, dramatic, episodic series, as pioneered by shows such as Serial and Limetown, but also non-fiction documentary series are starting to emerge beyond the crime genre which has dominated this space. And clearly, the launch of Luminary here as a paid subscription podcast service is raising the bar for quality, exclusive podcast content with $100 million in funding to create a number of really interesting shows, some of which are highlighted here. And I think, for us, the development of consumer as opposed to advertiser-funded podcast content is something that could be transformational in this space for those of us that are looking to monetize this media in a number of different ways. And finally, podcast as a live experience. There's a very successful UK podcast called My Dad Wrote a Porno, which started life in a relatively small way and has recently grown to sell out 2 nights at the Royal Albert Hall and 2 nights at the Sydney Opera House, playing to thousands of people. But even at a niche level, with a podcast such as our movie magazine podcast from Bauer, we run several successful live recorded podcast events which are attended by around 500 paying customers each time, plus we sell merchandise on site. It's not only a really useful supplement to revenues, but these mini conventions are a very useful marketing tool as they get shared on social media. So to wrap up, we're in the middle of a so-called golden age of TV, but the question is, are we reaching a golden age of podcasts too? There's absolutely no doubt that this is an extremely hot and vibrant media right now. Podcasts have exploded and are reaching more and more people. Investment continues to increase in the form of advertiser sponsorship and bespoke commissions. Podcast media is finally becoming a business in its own right. Distribution opportunities continue to expand, and production costs are falling, leading to more opportunities to create and publish. Smart publishers with passion, insight, and storytelling in their skill set, with great ideas and commercial capability, can be at the leading edge of this exciting new media. Thank you for your time.